So, in the spirit of Halloween, let's make vampire blood safe for vampires again. Why would you do that? Well, if you think about it, vampires are at the top of the food chain. They drink human blood. Unfortunately, because of design errors and ignorance, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of synthetic organic chemicals that have never been part of human body chemistry in that blood. And they are linked by serious science that's come out over the last 20 years to a range of today's epidemics of chronic diseases. So if we can make vampire foods safe for vampires again, by reducing exposures, we can make people healthier. This is a list, a partial list of the epidemics that we are facing today. Things like breast cancer, prostate cancer, diabetes, obesity, autism. These have increased dramatically over the 20th and 21st centuries. Shocking numbers. In 1975, that 1 in 5,000 boys developed autism. Today, it's 1 in 50. That's a 100-fold increase. That does not bode well for our grandchildren. And what we know from this science is that while all of these factors are all of these diseases are multifactorial, chemical contamination contributes some part of that body burden, of that disease burden. And what that does is give us an opportunity to improve human health by acting on the science that we know today. I am confident that virtually everyone in this room, through family and friends, has suffered from one or more of these conditions. We can change that. And if we change that, if we reduce the exposures, then not only do we improve human health, but we make that blood safe again for vampires. So, how did that fetus get to there from a fertilized egg? And how does it get from there to a fully functional, healthy adult? Well, hormones guide gene expression. They guide the turning on and turning off of genes, which occurs throughout our lifetimes, trillions of times a second. It's the symphony of life. Endocrine disrupting compounds, EDCs, hack that system. Sometimes they turn genes off when we need them. Sometimes they turn the wrong genes on at the wrong time. And when hacking like that happens to the hormone system, you wind up at risk to some of those epidemics. It's a problem. How are we exposed to things like this? Well, many industrial chemicals that are produced through the process of petroleum distillation have endocrine disrupting characteristics. Things like bisphenol A, which you probably all know of as BPA, and the phthalates that Richard mentioned. These are problematic chemicals. They interfere with hormone action. Pesticides. Pesticides get into conventional food and into our kitchens. They're also sprayed, they're picked up in mist, they're spread into those houses near that helicopter spraying pesticides. And lastly, they evaporate in the heat of the sun. They volatilize, they go into the clouds, they get into the raindrops, and they can be rained down on land several hundred kilometers away. Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, wrote about this past week, and I'll paraphrase what he said there. We've done a really good job at lowering contamination in the outer world, in the air and the water, the rivers. We have done a terrible job at eliminating contamination in the inner world, especially of the developing fetus and the brain. And that's underlying a lot of these problems. So how do those things get into us? We bring them into our homes. We don't question the safety of conventional produce. We don't understand that farmed salmon have persistent organic pollutants in them at high levels. We use pesticides freely. We use personal care products, which surprisingly contain things like phthalates. things as simple as a couch and as complicated as a computer have brominated flame retardants in them, which leak out of that equipment and the couch, enter the dust, get on the floor, and then are picked up in the hands of a toddler who's crawling and put into the mouth. Something as banal as thermal paper receipts, which we handle every day when we grab the receipt at the gas station or at the ATM, those are coated in dust with BPA. And every time you handle one, it's transferred to your skin and it penetrates and gets into your bloodstream. Cooking utensils, some, not all, but some are made out of materials that leach endocrine disrupting compounds also. And then there's food packaging equipment, materials. Plastics. That stuff, the plastics in those materials leach into the food with which it comes into contact, especially if it's heated. So let me give you a hint. Don't microwave in plastic. It's just a bad idea. This science of endocrine disruption has undergone a revolution over the last 20 years. And I'm going to summarize 3 pillars of that science for you. Things that completely change how we think about the consequences of that stuff we're bringing into our homes every day. First, low doses matter a lot. We used to think only high doses matter. Low doses matter, and I'll give you an example. Second, events in the womb don't stay in the womb. Fetal exposures can lead to problems much later in life. Third, how we assess safety, how the FDA and the EPA assess safety are based on profoundly flawed assumptions. They're getting it wrong today. So, low doses matter a lot. 2 frogs mating. What you don't know about that picture is that the lower frog is the brother of the upper frog, and exposure to a pesticide at 2.5 parts per billion when it was a tadpole led it to grow up as a fully functional female, capable of laying eggs that can be fertilized, capable of having those fertilized eggs grow up into adults and then reproduce the next generation. The pesticide is atrazine, a commonly used herbicide in the Midwest. 2.5 parts per billion. Low amounts matter. Does anyone have an idea what 1 part per billion is? Think of a pancake stack 4,000 miles high. 1 pancake in that stack is 1 part per billion. So a small amount can have a huge effect. Events in the womb don't stay in the womb. I apologize, it's almost lunch. Inside of a mouse. That's a control mouse in an experiment. It's a healthy mouse. It's got good kidneys, fully functional. It's got a small bladder. What would have happened if had that mouse in the womb been exposed to 20 parts per billion of BPA? Its kidneys have gone, these 2 mice are my age in mouse years, long after the exposures that took place in the womb. The kidneys have gone necrotic. The bladder is about to explode. Had it been left alive for a few more days, the bladder would have exploded. So what happened? So you've got a bladder, and you've got the outside world. The urethra is the tube through which you pee. Mice do it, we do it. That urethra has some tissue, a special tissue that responds to BPA when the exposure takes place in the womb, so that as the mouse ages, that tube constricts until the animal can no longer pee. And that's the result. Events in the womb can be manifest much later in life with very little indication of what's going on in between. This is another experiment with mice, this one done by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. It's the same strain of mice. They track their caloric intakes and activity levels from birth to this point, which is midlife. And what you can see is that one of them is morbidly obese. It's clearly not couch potatoes or gluttony involved. What was involved? Well, the morbidly obese mouse was exposed to 1 part per billion at birth to a potent endocrine disrupting compound. And it changed as the animal grew how many fat cells it had in its body. more fat cells, greater risk for obesity. So here's the question, and this goes right to the point of the flawed assumptions used by FDA and EPA today. What would have happened if the experimental mouse had been exposed to 1,000 parts per billion instead of 1? 1 produced morbid obesity. Would 1,000 produce an explosion? Actually, if you're a toxicologist at the EPA, you turn to a dictum developed in the 1600s by a man named Paracelsus, which says the dose makes the poison. The bigger the dose, the bigger the effect. That would predict an explosion. In fact, what happens is the mouse exposed to 1,000 parts per billion loses weight compared to the control animal. Exactly the opposite of what every regulatory test for safety has ever assumed. Hormones and endocrine disrupting compounds have one suite of effects at high doses and another suite of effects at low doses, and you can't predict one from the other. And yet all regulatory testing tests in the high dose range, waits and does a series of tests down the doses until there's no difference between control and experimental, and then says, ha, we found where it's safe. They never test in the low dose range. This is a deep flaw in every regulatory test that's been done on the planet by regulatory agencies, has been driven by that completely false assumption. Another assumption, as shoppers, we assume that the products in the market have been tested for safety, period. Not even by flawed methods. Well, unfortunately, the vast majority of chemicals that are used in products today have never been tested at all. And that's because of the way the law was structured in 1976, the Toxic Substance Control Act, where they looked at tens of thousands of chemicals and they said, oh, we don't see any dead bodies. They used the toxicology of the 1970s to ask, do we see any problems? And they said no. So let's just grandfather them all in. We're going to let people use them without any further testing. And that's what happened. Tens of thousands of chemicals are on the market today because they were grandfathered in 1976. I'll give you one example of how dangerous that assumption has proven to be. This is Doctyl sodium sulfosuccinate. It's a product used in laxatives in the US and elsewhere. It's taken by pregnant women during pregnancy. Scientists using today's toxicology, the toxicology of endocrine disruptions, discovered that that compound, DOSS, is an obesogen. It makes exposed individuals become fatter. A significant percentage of pregnant women in the US today are taking this during pregnancy. This may be something, maybe, because the science isn't done yet, but may be contributing to today's current obesity crisis. So there are things that we can do as individuals. We can make personal lifestyle choices about what to expose ourselves and what not to, if we know what's out there and what's dangerous. Unfortunately, moms should not have to be chemical engineers to go shopping for their kids. But that's what the system forces them to do today. What this book does is say, if you know something about this, you can reduce your exposures or you can increase your exposures. And not only is there's this book, which is humorous, there are many studies published in the scientific literature which show the same thing. You can make choices that reduce your exposures. There are other things that need to happen. You know the old dictum, reduce, reuse, recycle? Well, I've been working, and there are lots of people working on the fourth R, which is redesign. We have enough information now out of the scientific research on endocrine disruption over the last 20 years to know how to design new chemicals that do not create this hazard. And you know what? There's a market for that out there. You are driving companies to make choices about avoiding hazardous materials in the product that they sell you. It's not done yet, but think about BPA and the fact you go into any market that sells bottles like this today, they're labeled BPA free. It's not by accident, it's because you're paying those companies a premium to provide you with safer materials. So we have the knowledge today to introduce a new generation of materials that are inherently safer. You are rewarding companies that do that. Target, Walmart, Costco, Home Depot have all been sending lists to their suppliers saying, enough already. Get that stuff out of the things that we're buying you. So I thank you for contributing to trying to the path to solve this problem. We can do this. We have the science that is sufficient to solve this problem today. And when we use that science, not only are we going to make people healthier, but we're going to make vampire blood safe again. Thank you.
Thank you.